Hi everybody, welcome to our student ministry teaching online. We're glad you're here with us, watching us today. I have a question for you. Have you ever had a best friend? Who would you say is your best friend? Now, most of us have had a best friend, or even a friend that we might not call our best friend, but is really close. What would you do for that best friend? You know, right? That's what we call loyalty. Right? The things that being loyal to someone in that way. And we're going to take a look at that today with Daniel and how he is an incredible example of loyalty and how we can strive to be like him in that. I'm glad you guys are with us. Before we get started, take a moment to pause your video and grab your Bible, a notebook, a pen, so you can follow along and keep notes with us. So go ahead, pause right now, go get your stuff and come on back. All right, guys, I'm glad you're back with us. We're going to take a moment to pray before we get started. I'm excited to be able to delve into this, but I think we need to prepare our hearts to understand the loyalty that Daniel has and how we can achieve that, or how we can start moving towards that. So I want you to take a minute and just pray to yourself. Pray to remove distractions. Pray to open your eyes and your hearts to the loyalty of God and the loyalty that we can have to God. Amen. You know, it's an awesome thing that we've been able to go through Daniel. I was just looking back at the last 5 weeks and the lessons that we've learned, and this week is no different. We're going to learn a lot, but the story itself, you guys already know. The majority of you will have known Daniel and the lion's den, the story of what that is, for years. It's so exciting because I'm teaching right now, but the kids ministry is doing that this week as well. So they're going to get to learn about Daniel and the lion's den and the miracle that happens when we're loyal to God. And it's just a really exciting, and it was a new way to look at it for me. You know, I've known the story for 30 plus years, but to really delve into why Daniel did what he did and how he did it was because of it's all because of being loyal, loyalty. You know what I mean. So we're going to just dive right in. We're going to start right in Daniel chapter 6. That's where we'll find ourselves today. We're talking about Daniel. Daniel in this story is now the third king that he has served under in the book of Daniel. It started with Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar, and now he is under King Darius. And Darius takes is getting ready to set up his kingdom in Babylon and sets up 120 satraps, or these are guys who are basically local governors, if you will, over the local provinces, and then they report to some lieutenants who then report to the king. Daniel here really shows that he was loyal to authority. Daniel's had a rough time of it from when he was a teenager all the way through now. He's, like I said, now serving under his third king of Babylon when he's not at home. He's still here in Babylon. And each one, he has distinguished himself by being loyal to them and loyal to what they ask of him. it says in verse 3, chapter 6, verse 3, excuse me, chapter 6, verse 3, that Daniel was a favorite, that he became distinguished above all because there was an excellent spirit in him. Now, we all know that's God, who he's following and who he's devoting his life to. We know where that comes from. But Darius, when looking at it, is just seeing that Daniel has an excellent spirit within him. It says, for example, in verse 3, I'm going to read it out to you. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. He did his duty well. The authority that was placed over him, not by his choice, he still followed. It's such a great example for us that we should be following the authorities put over us. We have all kinds of authorities put over us. Students, you have your parents and your teachers. We as adults have the government or our bosses or whatever it may be who are in authority over us. And we're called to obey that authority. In John chapter 19 and Romans chapter 13, both mention that all authority on earth is given by God and that we are supposed to submit ourselves to that authority. Daniel was doing just that. The authority put over him of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar and Darius and Cyrus later and going forth, they were not biblical authorities. In fact, they were pagan. They worshiped other gods. But he served them dutifully, there we go, dutifully, and he was loyal to them. He did what they asked. To the point of not disobeying God. His loyalty to the authority was all because of his loyalty to God. See, Daniel wasn't just loyal to the authorities. He was actually first and foremost loyal to God. And it was his ability to continue and to focus on the loyalty to God that allowed him to be distinguished, that showed an excellent spirit within him. He was loyal to God. He didn't do anything that God didn't allow. We could even go back over the 5 chapters that we've looked at. In Daniel 1, he chose not to eat the king's food or wine because he didn't want to defile himself. He was loyal to God. With that loyalty, it showed that they were actually better off without eating the wine or drinking the wine and eating the king's food. It showed that they were better off. In Daniel 2, when Nebuchadnezzar is getting ready to kill the wise men, Daniel went back to his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and said, "We need to go to God and seek mercy regarding this dream." He was loyal to God in the face of death. He was loyal to God in the face of uncertainty of God, just help us figure this out. God rewarded him with the vision, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had and its interpretation. In chapter 4, after interpreting the second dream of Nebuchadnezzar, he exhorts Nebuchadnezzar, still being loyal to Nebuchadnezzar, but within the loyalty of God that he has, he exhorts Nebuchadnezzar to turn away from sin and to turn to righteousness so that those things in the dream wouldn't come true. Still pointing Nebuchadnezzar to God while being loyal to Nebuchadnezzar, saying, "I don't want this to happen to you. Here's how you can avoid it," knowing that it still wasn't going to happen, but never stepping away from God. And last week, he went before Belshazzar and basically told him that he was not only going to die, but his kingdom was going to be taken and that they were going to be overrun. And he still stood in the face of what most of us, if we're going to go up to a king and say, hey, you're about to die, your kingdom's about to be taken away from you, most kings are not going to take it very well by putting a robe on your back and a gold chain around your neck, but they're going to kill you. In the face of all that, Daniel was loyal to God by sending the message that God told him to, by interpreting the writing on the wall. He never lost his loyalty to God. And still now we can look at it in verse 4. It says, then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. Not because he followed the rules, or not because he made a power play to be in the king's graces. It's because he was faithful that they couldn't find any fault in him. Before we move on, I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about what loyalty brings. I asked you before about your best friend and what you might do for your best friend. You know, there's a common promise is, I would die for you. I would take a bullet for you, right? Society tells us that you should do anything for your best friend, even if that anything might be a little bit morally or legally gray. You don't give up on your friends. Well, that's not loyalty. That's wanting to keep that person close, but that's not real loyalty, because loyalty is something that God is ascribed to. One of the descriptions of and the character of God is he is loyal. He is faithful. Well, that means loyal and faithful in the sense of trouble and fear and even death. Well, if you're going to get around the morals, if you're going to say, well, I'm going to help my friend, but I need to lie to do that, or I need to do something a little shady, that's not being loyal to God. That's loyal in the sense of this world. And that's exactly what it brings. When we show loyalty to God, it brings treachery from this world. Loyalty to God brings treachery from this world. And this is a great example, the story of it. We know as the story goes on that the enemies of Daniel, the other high lieutenants and high officials and satraps, conspired against Daniel. In fact, in verse 5 it says, these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. They knew that it was because of his loyalty to God that he was found without fault. Even in verse 4, it says, then the high officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel. Right? We've read this before. And it goes on and says, no error or fault was found in him. There's no other way they were going to be able to get Daniel or to get him out without making something that would trap him because of God. They saw his loyalty. They knew that he would never do anything against God. And it gave them their in to the king. We know the story. They go to Darius and say, Darius, we need to celebrate you. We need to make sure that every person obeys you and understands you and worships only you. So you need to make this decree that only you for 30 days should be prayed to, should be intervened to. They should do that. They're propping Darius up. They're saying, hey, you're so good that you're the only thing that should be worshiped for the next 30 days. It's not uncommon for pagan beliefs to promote their rulers to a sense of godhood. It wasn't so much in this culture, but enough that he was a representative of God. Well, they were kind of pushing him towards, hey, you're so great that we should only worship you. In fact, we're going to make it so that, or you're going to make it so, we suggest you make it so, and we suggest that you do this now, that anybody who doesn't, no questions asked, throw them in the lion's den. Just put them in there. Doesn't matter what it is. And there's an interesting part in here that it leads to what this is and why this story went the way that it did. And they said it's according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. Well, Darius was a Median. I don't know. How do you say it? He was from there, and their law said that once the king made a law, it could not be undone, even by the king himself. Promoting again that he was the most important thing. So they're saying, you need to make this law. And he said, okay, that sounds pretty good to me. I mean, it shows that I'm in power and I'm in control, when really it was these governors and officials who were saying, hey, we're going to control you the way we want to. And that's away from Daniel. These men were men with faults, and they just couldn't compete with the man who didn't have any faults in Daniel. They couldn't compete with it, so they had to get him by way of God. His loyalty to God is what brought this on him. But the great part of all of this is that while loyalty to God breeds treachery in this world, loyalty to God breeds loyalty without limits from God. There's nothing that he can't do or make happen. And when we show our loyalty to him in such a strong way, we get limitless loyalty back from him. He is faithful and just. And he's going to show that. And this is where it leads to Daniel. It's the next few verses are really enlightening and not part of the normal part that we learn from Daniel in the lion's den. After the king had made the decree, the king's officials said, well, you know who the guy is that's doing this? We know. We'll tell you. Right then and there, it's Daniel. The king was distressed. It says that the king was much distressed, and he worked the rest of the day to figure out a way to make the law not happen, to make Daniel not have to face the lion's den. Even from Darius, a foreigner, not related to Daniel by any means of culture or blood or anything like that, Daniel's loyalty to him brought loyalty from Darius. Darius was loyal to Daniel so much so that he worked until the end of the day when the official said, well, you got to make it happen. You have to throw him in the lion's den. You cannot revoke this law by the Medes and the Persians. You said it yourself. You can't do it. And Darius was distraught. So they led Daniel to the lion's den. They put him in, and he showed a bit of compassion. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago about Daniel's compassion, bred compassion back towards him. We see it again in Darius, and he says, may your God, Darius says to Daniel as they're getting ready to seal the Raka, the entrance to the lion's den, he says, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. Darius recognized that loyalty to God. He recognized Daniel's loyalty to him. And he showed his loyalty back to Daniel, even just there. After a stone was laid over the den, Darius went back to his palace for the night. And it shows, again, something really interesting, that Darius was distraught. He was distressed. He couldn't sleep. What we know of Darius through history is that he was a womanizer and a drinker. And he chose not to have any of those that night either to comfort him because he was so distraught. At daybreak, the first time that he could, he runs out to the den and pulls back the stone. And he says in verse 20, as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. He was so upset about it. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God," recognizing that God has a part to play in this, "has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" You're not going to do that for somebody who just works for you. You're not going to do that for someone who hasn't shown you immense attention and focus to doing what you've asked them to do, or loyalty, as we keep saying. I know I say it a lot, but it's there. You're not going to show that without it. And here's where God shows his loyalty back to Daniel. Daniel says back to him, "O king, live forever." Daniel takes this moment to say, "King, I am still loyal to you. Even though you just threw me into the lion's den overnight, I am loyal to what you are. Because my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Because I was found blameless before him." Daniel's saying, I was found blameless before God because I am loyal to him. There's nothing that I haven't done that has been not for him. Everything I've done is for God. But he doesn't stop there. He says, "And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Daniel says, because of my loyalty to God, I have been loyal to you. And because of my loyalty to God, God shows that back to me. He sent an angel and shut the mouths of the lions, so that way they could not harm him. Darius immediately sees it. He releases Daniel. The consequences of trying to fool the king, well, yeah, like I had mentioned, telling the king that his kingdom is going to fall like Daniel did to Belshazzar, most people are going to be afraid of death. Daniel wasn't. Well, these men who tricked Darius into thinking Daniel was not loyal to him, immediately he took them and their whole families and threw them into the den. And before those men reached the bottom of the ramp, they were pounced upon by the lions, broke every bone. There was no angel surrounding them because there was no loyalty to anyone except for themselves. And the loyalty that was shown to Daniel by God was then felt by Darius. And I believe that his loyalty encouraged the authority to turn away from his pagan beliefs, because it says in verse 25, "Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, 'Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel.'" And just like Nebuchadnezzar did, we see a pagan god using terms that they wouldn't use unless there's some sort of belief there. He says, "For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." God showed his loyalty to Daniel. Through Daniel's loyalty to Darius, Darius was shown the loyalty of God. What an awesome example for us. If we can be loyal to God, he will be loyal to us. If we can do everything we can to look to God and to focus on him, that will only make us better in our lives here, stepping in God's will, stepping in his worship and doing that to God. We can still do that today. And the loyalty he shows back on us is unbelievable. Guys, the big idea, our loyalty should be limitless to the God who loves us, because it's limitless right back to us. Daniel was so loyal to Darius that the last verse says, "So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. His loyalty to God allowed him to be prosperous under Darius's reign, and then even under the next king as well. And that loyalty to those men, to those authorities, only comes when we can give all of our loyalty to God. I'm so glad to have seen you guys this week. I challenge you to look at your life, to see what loyalty really means and how we can do that in our daily lives to God. How we can pray to Him without ceasing. How we can turn to Him when we're troubled. How we can thank Him when we're blessed. Because that loyalty is limitless. Love you guys. We'll see you again.